this is national security. You guys should be developing a plan. It's not my responsibility. And I said, what if I didn't show up? And I swear to God, this is what he says. He goes, well, you're here, aren't you?
Jim, again, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Happy to be here. Very good. Thanks.
So before we get started here, I just kind of want to, I know who you are. I've been, as I mentioned before we got started here, I'm a big fan of your work. If you don't mind just telling the audience like what you're all about, what your story is, and just give us your intro, sir.
Sure. About 20 years ago, I bought a bankrupt iron ore mine. And
as we all do,
hey, everybody does, right? You don't have one. So about 5 years into owning it, prices started moving. So we started looking at the economics of the project, and I found about 6 or 7 bankers' boxes in a janitor's closet, and pulled them out, lifted the lid off, and I looked at the little tab on the manila envelope, and it said rare earths. And I'm like, wow, that's probably valuable. That sounds good. Put the lid back on, put it back on the shelf, lock the door. We hire a bunch of engineering guys from all over the world, Brazil, Australia, Canada, some American folks. And we're working up the economics on reopening this iron ore mine. So we're doing all this work with all these engineering companies, and I'm basically out on site with these guys for a couple of months, and they're all working on their thing, and I get out these banker boxes and I start looking at them, and they're like, "That's little stuff. Don't even worry about that. That's nothing. I don't even know what that is." And it took me about 3 months to figure out that these materials that happen to be co-located with the iron ore deposit and dispersed all over the place. It took me about 3 months to figure out that these are strategic, critical materials for our economy and our defense system, and that at the time, the United States didn't have a single component of the value chain. We weren't mining them, we weren't refining them, we weren't separating them, we weren't making them into metals, and we were literally 90% dependent on China. I thought, well, this is kind of scary. So sent off a letter to my congressman, sent off a letter to my senator, and my senator, well, actually both of them, the Senator Bond and Congressman Carnahan, both wrote letters and got me in front of the Department of Defense. And this was, it was kind of exciting. I'm like, hey, I found something. This is cool. I'm sure they know about it, right? I mean, national security. So I get this meeting at the Pentagon. I go in and I meet their #1 expert on this topic. And I'd spent a lot of time thinking about this problem and the geopolitics of it and why it existed, and that it was a manufactured problem. It wasn't by chance. It was very geopolitically strategic for China in that we were at risk. So I met with the Pentagon guy and I laid out this plan, and I said, well, here's what they're doing, and here's how we can counter it. And if we counter it like this, they won't be able to offset our actions, and we'll be successful at reestablishing a value chain. And the guy says to me, wow, this is really interesting. You put a lot of thought into this. This is really good. And I said, yeah, thanks. So, I appreciate it. I'm sure that you're looking at other things, right? And he looks at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, I just kind of threw this together, and, I'm just a private sector guy, and this is the Pentagon, and I'm sure you guys have been looking at this, and you have a real plan, right? And he goes, I don't understand what you're talking about. I said, this is a national security issue. So I am under the assumption that the Pentagon is on top of this, and there's lots of other good plans, and I'm not the only private sector guy with the solution. And he looked at me like, well, no, that's it. And I said, what do you mean? I said, this is national security. You guys should be developing a plan. It's not my responsibility. I said, what if I didn't show up? And I swear to God, this is what he says. He goes, well, you're here, aren't you?
Sorry. I'm sorry. I was not, wow. Okay. I'm shocked, but I should.
That to me, this went from being like, hey, it's kind of cool, I'm writing a letter to the Pentagon and letting them know there's a problem, to,
yeah,
holy shiter, we got a serious problem. And it became it went from just this casual thing to kind of taking it on as a personal responsibility. I started like getting involved in writing and studying the situation more and more. And within 3 or 4 years, I literally was considered a world expert on this, and the only person that, even today, I'm still pretty much the only person that looks at this situation from a geopolitical standpoint. Everybody else that is in this space and contributes in this space, they're all free market folks, right? Going, hey, we're MP Materials, and the government gives us a bunch of money. We can fix this problem, be America's hero. And if you understand what the problem is, you know that will never happen. It can't work that way. It will never work that way. So for about 12, 13, 14 years, I've got some people I work with, like John Kutch at the Thorium Energy Alliance. You know John. But there's a very small band of folks that have put in a tremendous amount of energy to alert our Congress, the last 3 administrations, and quite frankly, the Pentagon's hopeless. The Pentagon's literally hopeless. But to make them understand this is a geopolitical strategy, and rare earths is just one tiny piece.
Mm-hmm. Man, it's funny, but it's sad at the same time. I mean, it's like that's a lot to put on one person who literally just walked in here, basically finding out that there's no. I mean, from what it sounds like, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie, but it's kind of like Bruce Willis in Armageddon, where he talks to Billy Bob Thornton and he says, "This is what's happening. The world's going to end. We need you to go do this." I'm like, okay. But what's your contingency plan? Well, it's like, well, we don't have one. I'm like, this is the U.S. It's like you put a man on the moon. You guys are geniuses. You don't know how to.
Right. Like, well, this is true. I mean, the Pentagon is, everybody assumes that the Pentagon works on national security issues and contingency plans. But as we discussed, before the interview, that quick little chat about how bad things really are.
Yeah.
The Pentagon is populated with people who would like to work in the private sector and people from the private sector. And, promotions and careers are mostly based on propping up defense companies in various congressional districts and selling weapons to unstable regimes, knowing that will generate the sale of more weapons to different unstable regimes. So it's basically a giant weapons bazaar run by a bunch of cronies looking for rewards in the private sector. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some wonderful uniformed people in the Pentagon, but they're not running the place. They're political folks and they're ambitious folks. Those are the folks running the Pentagon. And not one of them is capable of thinking in the calculus of Cold War politics and the great game strategy thinking modes that shape the real world. They're just short-term opportunists, hitching a ride, and so there's nobody developing real plans at the Pentagon based on real contingencies. I mean, the the Pentagon is like, you know, it's a platform that the neocons use to, you know, set various parts of the world on fire so we can intervene. So, and Congress and the administration blindly have faith that they're the guys with the plan. But there is no plan, not that kind of plan.
Yeah. Well, thank God at least one of us was smart enough to come up with a plan. And on that note, Mr. Kennedy, what is the plan? Please tell. I mean, I know the plan. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of your work. I've been watching your lectures for the past 10 years, and you know you've got some great stuff. But for some of my newer audience, you know, who are interested in the subject matter, I mean, first off, let's get into basics here. What are rare earth materials for anyone who doesn't know? What are rare earth materials? Why are they important?
So rare earth materials are constituted by 16 chemical elements that have commercial, industrial, chemical, electronic, magnetic applications. They're the magic dust of everything that matters, you know. Electric vehicles, your iPhone, secure satellite communication, anything that costs a lot of money and does a really good job. They all need some of this magic dust. And
unobtainium, got it.
So, you know, and they have crazy names like lutetium, dysprosium, gallium, and, you know, they sit down at the bottom of the periodic table, and for most of human history, they were just curiosities. They had no significant applications until about 1982, when someone at General Motors and someone at Sumitomo, both, I guess Hitachi technically is the owner, both simultaneously invented the rare earth magnet. And the rare earth magnet basically changed the entire world. And, you know, 90% of all value for every rare earth used in every device on this planet comes from rare earth magnets, and the rest of it, you know, doesn't even add up to 10%. No way. So they're everywhere. They're in everything. Every cool thing you use has got these materials in it. And so you know the story, but the U.S. and Japan and France were world leaders in rare earths. And in 1980, when the West, when Russia, the Soviet Union, and the United States were trying to manage for proliferation issues, in this wonderful spirit of cooperation we need to get back to like immediately, the trickle down of regulatory eventually intersected with mining and the regulations around mining. And what happened was they took the very specific mining laws written for mining uranium, and they said, well, they're good for uranium. Let's apply these laws to everything that's mined. And no thinking beyond, well, we'll make the world a safer place. They effectively classified 100% of the world's entire supply of heavy rare earths and about 35 to 40% of the world's overall supply of rare earths were classified as nuclear source material. And that happened because most of the rare earths and all of the heavy rare earths were a byproduct of some other commodity. So if you were mining mineral sands or iron ore or phosphates, you would have these high value heavy rare earths. And they always had this little companion element, thorium. And the way the law was written, the second you pulled out what you wanted, once you pulled out your zirconium, by definition, the monazite residual was source material. And so nobody wanted to mine it, and certainly nobody wanted to buy it. Who wants to buy monazite that's legally classified as source material? Remove your rare earths, and you end up with a pile of thorium, and the thorium is legally treated the same as if you had plutonium, right? You know, how fun is that? That's a great way to go bankrupt. So that terminated all of that mining. And, you know, who did that work out well for? Well, China, right? Surprise, surprise. Go look at a graph and you'll look at exactly the point where China jumps into this game. And that's in 1980. And they started out basically doing the dirty work of digging. Then they learned how to do oxides, and then they learned how to do separation, and then they learned how to do metals, and then they learned how to do magnets. And no matter what anybody tells you, they learned all of that with the direct help of US, Japanese, and French corporations. Sure, they stole it a little bit, but 99% of it was turned over to the Chinese because these guys wanted to offload the environmental liabilities, right? So they're offloading environmental liabilities and getting lower costs. And so what happens is China gets so good at this that while the world's asleep, you know, while Wall Street's counting its money, China takes over the entire space. I believe it was 1984 when China announced to a sleeping audience that it had established the world's largest rare earth research institute on this planet Earth. And with a complete yawn, no one commented, no one cared. And you could find this as a footnote in the Ames Journal of Rare Earths, but no place else. It wasn't news to anybody. Well, a decade or two passes, and now the Chinese have the equivalent of 5 national laboratories that do nothing but rare earths, right? They have 2 cities, and these 2 cities that the government refers to as rare earth cities, they have a combined population of about 20 million human beings. So that basically means you have a vertically integrated value chain city, and pretty much everybody living in the city directly or indirectly supports that. In the United States, if you rounded up every academic and every, you know, MP materials person and, you know, every guy like me and put us all in the same room, well, it'd get, I mean, I'm going to exaggerate, you get 2,000 people. In China, they have at least 200,000 PhD scientists working on this. They have 2 cities with 20 million people working on this. They have dozens and dozens of industrial and commercial trade group associations working on this. And they've gone from being, you know, the dirty mining, you know, country to being the controller of the technology, the owner of the end of the value chain. And now they're essentially subbing out all of the dirty work of mining to other countries. You know, they use their one belt, one road policy to get other countries to commit to supplying them the raw resource, and they do all the value adding inside China. So, you know, this is typical of how stupid American policy is. You'll have people associated with the Pentagon or writing in trade journals that talk about American, you know, America's progress in this space, and they'll say, "Wow, we're doing great." You know, just a few years ago, China controlled 97% of the world's rare earth mining, and now it's down to 60%. We're winning. And I'm like, no, that's the definition of you're a loser. You're a loser because one of the countries they conned into mining this stuff and supplying their high value value chain is the United States. In fact, the Pentagon and Wall Street funded a company in the United States that digs up our resources and sends them to China. That's the definition of a loser. That's how you exploit third world countries. We're on the list now. So this is the problem. Nobody understands that this is a grand geopolitical strategy and that rare earths are just one of many critical materials that China has invested 2 decades of commitment in, to gain control over. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say this. I've been reading up on this for quite a while, and I was aware it was a problem, but I don't think I've ever had it phrased like that before. So I guess the question now is, because I've heard of solutions, I've heard of the co-ops, I've heard the stuff that you and John have advocated for, and they make a lot of sense, and I fully support it. Outside this channel and on the channel, but when I'm hearing these numbers, when I'm hearing 2 cities with a combined population of 20 million people, 200,000 PhDs that are dedicated to advancing development in this space, and when we're talking about one of the most strategic, resources on Earth, how on earth does a country like the United States or just any Western nation compete with that? I guess the question I should be asking is, before we go any further, is there any legitimate hope that we could even compete in this space down the road? Like, maybe not right. I mean, obviously, I'm not expecting us to turn on a dime, and especially with the way things have been going for the last 20, 30 years. But as we've talked about, but is there any hope that at some point we could compete in this space? To me, it doesn't sound like we could.
So the original cooperative strategy, which was offered up as a bill in the House and the Senate twice. It was offered as an amendment to the NDAA 3 times, but it could never get any support because companies like Molycorp, MP Materials, Linus, and a couple dozen junior wannabe rare earth mining companies hated the bill. They strongly opposed the bill. And it came back around in 2018. And what happened is the project was opposed by Molycorp, MP Materials, Linus, 2-3 dozen junior wannabe rare earth companies. And the reason they opposed it was that we would have corrected the nuclear source material issue, and every mining company that was currently throwing away super high value rare earths could have sold them into this cooperative where the rare earths could be processed and the thorium could be safely stored for future use. So they opposed it because the amount of rare earths that are currently recoverable in the United States from existing mining waste streams equals 85% of global demand. Right?
So just to get this straight, the main reason why these companies were opposed to it wasn't that it was a bad solution or that in any way, shape, or form it was going to hurt their business. It's that it would have required no new mining whatsoever. Like the phosphate sands industry in Florida, I know for a fact they mine. They're dealing with monazite on a regular basis. So you're telling me that because they could literally meet U.S. or global, in your case, not even U.S. demand. You're talking about global demand.
85% of global demand is selling to every country in the world, plus selling China about half of what they need. And they killed it
through waste streams.
From waste, from trash. So what happens is mining companies' waste becomes cleaner, right? The rare earth problem ends forever. Literally, it's gone forever because all of these mining companies we talked to considered these waste streams to be liabilities. Some of them told members of Congress they would pay us to take it, right? So you're talking about low, no cost, rare earth resource supply. Now, so if our mining cost for good material is 0 and China's is 1 yuan, who cares? Ours is cheaper. That's a good place to start. And if you're starting there and you've got super high quality heavy rare earths, you can build a fully integrated value chain. And the way we protected the value chain was by establishing a cooperative so that the end users already owned the finished product, right? They put the capital up and they got their percentage of magnets or phosphors or whatever they wanted. And so they're already committed to pay for these materials at their actual cost. So why would go to China and buy them? How does China undercut the cost of material they're already committed to buying? So it would have terminated China's monopoly forever. But because members of Congress are influenced by what we refer to as campaign donations and other governments would refer to as bribes, the idea was scuttled. Marco Rubio was a great champion for this. He was the last person to sponsor it as a bill in the Senate. And in the end, they just said, John, we can't get anybody to support it because there's too much constituent interest that's vested in the current system. Well, the current system is shortage of supply and high prices, right? That's everybody else's business model. Our business model was, let's just turn trash into cash, right?
So was it just the mining companies? Because I'd imagine that the defense industry would also have some issues with this as well, because there's a federal law saying that you have to make, like, I'll give you an example. I live in Fort Worth. The F-35 is manufactured here, or I should say assembled here. There's a bunch of different places and sub-facilities where they make different components. But the law basically states that if you're a defense contractor, you have to make the majority of the stuff through U.S. or allied components. Obviously, if we're talking about the electro-optical targeting system off the F-35, that requires rare earths. And last time I checked, Lockheed Martin doesn't have a rare earth stockpile just sitting somewhere in Bethesda where they can access it. So they get exemptions every year. So was part of it, I mean, I understand the mining industry and why they wanted to push back, but would the defense industry have any issues with this? Because I imagine if there was all of a sudden a reason to not grant exemptions, they'd have to spend billions of dollars to develop a domestic supply chain to hire U.S. workers to make this stuff in America. I mean,
so that was a worry of theirs. But we told them, look, we don't need any of that. Their concern, their fear, and their opposition to our solution actually reflected the fear of retaliation by defense contractors from China. So the reason the Pentagon opposed our bill, the best we can tell, is that the defense contractors currently sourced all of this stuff through China. And if they quit sourcing it through China, and there was any supply disruption, or during the interim, China could punish anybody that backed this bill. So it was really fear of Chinese retaliation into the supply chain seems to be the single biggest reason the Pentagon opposed this. But back to your earlier point about this requirement for domestic content, allied content. So the Pentagon was playing a very disingenuous game where they were pointing to a law that defined critical materials, and they had that law written so that it would reflect the supply constraints on domestic defense contractors. So the way they defined critical was they defined it at the point of alloy. pretty tricky, right?
Ah.
So the
Mm.
Pentagon, pointing to this law saying we're following the law, knew full well that every metal that made up the alloy, that made up the magnet, that made up the guidance system for that Tomahawk cruise missile came directly from China, but they didn't care.
Mm.
In fact, it was a
Mm.
big secret. It had been going on for at least a decade. I showed up and I wrote a couple papers on it and we distributed it to members of Congress. And not only did I get threatened, my lobbyist was threatened. So this was an ongoing, uh, um, scandal that nobody will cover because everybody's afraid of the Pentagon. But the Pentagon blatantly
Mm-hmm.
knew this, covered this up, and then when I made a point of educating members of Congress on it, I was told in very aggressive terms to never ever discuss the issue again. So you want going back to our earlier discussion, you know, a lot of our problems today um, are because everyone assumes that the Pentagon is there doing and thinking strategically for us, but the fact is, no, they're just like any other scumbag corporation, trying to cram something unhealthy into a food product because it's cheaper than what they should be putting in there. They don't care. They really don't care.
Mm.
And I truly mean that. I had a discussion with the Assistant Secretary of Defense where we were laying the scenario out, and he got real aggressive with me, and he leans in over me. He's like 6'5", and you know me. If I was green, you'd think I was a leprechaun. But this guy leans in with me, just physical intimidation, right? And I said, look, let's let's run the scenario all the way through. This is where we're at. And this is literally what he says to me. He goes, we know that. It's too late. It's it's too late.
Wow.
So you put men and women in uniform, you put them in harm's way, but you already know the game's over. That is how bad these people in the Pentagon are. I'm not talking about the uniformed people,
Wow.
that are there
No,
because they
no.
care. I'm talking about these political folks and these people that are climbing ladders wearing a uniform to get to the head of the line on the ladder. And they don't represent most people's sons and daughters that end up working in that building, but they're running the show. This is serious. This is the Assistant Secretary of
Yeah.
Defense for industrial policy.
Under which administration? Under the previous one, or during the Obama year? Because I know you were pretty active.
This was
Back in.
this was Obama, but we had similarly dead end meetings under Trump. Remember, I mean, this appointee was a regular appointee. He wasn't somebody that was, an Obama guy. He
Sure.
was a guy that was making
Yeah.
everybody happy on the defense side and checking the boxes on the Pentagon side. He was a playa. He was a playa, right? So you can't blame administrations. The rot inside the Pentagon goes back a long way. I think Eisenhower told us that there was something rotten there. And so, like everything else, you go back and you look at the Pentagon intentionally allowing this disingenuous interpretation of a law, knowing full well that we are addicting the defense industry to Chinese materials, and to let that go on for a decade or a decade and a half. They are responsible for what happened. No one will call them out because everybody thinks that the Pentagon is this, something wrapped in a flag and somehow, wholesome. Well, it's not anymore. Maybe it never was. You know, it's an institution that sells weapons to unstable governments so that other unstable governments want more weapons. None of that has anything to do with national security. In fact, if you're a smart person, you would go, that sounds like national insecurity. But if you're in the business of selling weapons, national insecurity is good business. So,
I guess so.
So where are we
Clearly,
at
here at
today?
Rock Logic, we're in the wrong business.
It's all bad.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, I mean, Jesus, I don't even know what to ask. If we should just. Yeah, I mean,
So I'll tell you what's going on
it does
today.
sound.
I'll tell you what's going on today. So um, nobody wants a holistic solution because constituents, want to feed, right? And they need disproportionate profits generated through manipulated shortages, right? So if we're throwing away 85% of the world's rare earth needs every year, and they fight a law to utilize that material, what they're actually doing is they're using the legislative process to continue an unnatural shortage, right? That's their business plan.
Mm-hmm.
Profits first, America third. So this is where we're at. Um, and uh, Eric Swalwell out in California and came up with a piece of legislation that we supported. It made a lot of sense. It's got some issues. So there's a new piece of legislation looking for a Senate sponsor, and it takes the Eric Swalwell tax credit bill, and it basically irons out a bunch of the serious problems in it. But what the tax bill does is it recognizes where we're at exactly today. So this isn't a holistic solution, it's a snapshot solution, right? So, it's not super durable, but it's the best we can do. And so what that solution does is it looks at the world and it says, right now, China has created tremendous margins in the mining side of rare earths. So we don't even have to think about that, right? China's basically made it lucrative for people to supply China. But as you go up the value chain, or sorry, down the value chain towards finished materials, what happens is China shrinks those margins not only to zero, they actually become negative. So there's a little bit of money if you want to try to make oxides. There's a lot less money if you want to try to separate. The truth is, China's really the only operating entity in the world that can separate all 16 rare earths. The only Western company that could do it, its facilities are basically idle in France because of the thorium problem we talked about before. So we've sidelined the only, technology outside of China for the same problem that you and I and John have been talking about for a decade. So there's very little money in separation. And then if you look at the value from rare earth mining to separated elements, that only represents about 10% of the total value of all rare earth uses, right? So all of the value, literally 95% of the value is metallic. And that's where China runs. That's where China focuses its monopoly strategies. And what it does is it provides, non-traceable subsidies, which would be low labor costs, preferential energy costs, lower environmental compliance costs, and then direct things like tax subsidies and tariffs. And so what happens is anybody in the world that wants to make magnetic materials or metallics has to buy those separated materials from China with all of the markups, export markups. It's mathematically impossible to compete with China. So let's say you're LCM in the UK or Shinichi in Thailand. By the time you acquire the materials you need, including stuff that only comes from China, your magnets are costing 20% more. So what's the market for a magnet that costs 20% more? Well, defense contractors, people that have social or political motives. But if you're making, 11 million starter motors every year for an automobile, you're not going to pay 20% more. And more important than price is that China is the only country in the world that can guarantee delivery, right? Key. The word to, when you're talking rare earth materials and rare earth magnets, the operable word is uninterruptibility, right? China is the only place in the world that can guarantee that. So are you going to pay 20% more and then put yourself at risk for interruption? No. So you can't just build a magnet factory and say we solved the problem. So the bill that Eric Swalwell put together, that we're working on, that we're collaborating on, that expands on that, it creates some tax credits right there at the point of metallurgy, at separation, at metallurgy, and at magnet fabrication. And if you froze world prices right now and they didn't double or triple, the size of the tax subsidies are adequate that you could build a magnet factory in Youngstown, Ohio, crank out magnets, be profitable against China. And if you vertically integrated, you can say, hey, we're uninterruptible. We own our own resource. We have our own oxide facilities. We have our own separation facilities. We make our own magnetic materials. We do our own fabrication. So that's what's politically possible, and that's what we're working on now. And we hope we're successful, but to get it done, you need congressional support, and we're working on that. But that's what it takes, and we envision that the bill will encourage the establishment and creation of vertically integrated supply chains, and then you're back in business. Are you kicking China's ass? No. Are you getting up for the game and putting the uniform on and going to the field? Yes. That's a starting point. And that's the best we can do in the intermediate. And we hope to do more going out, but we have to start somewhere. We had to give up holistic solutions and accept that you can just do targeted things, and those solutions may be based on a snapshot in time. And why is it important to say snapshot in time? Well, China embargoes rare earths. What do you think the prices are going to be? Right? Suddenly, whatever tax credits you created, there's no way to cover the difference.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about, I mean, it sounds like an interesting bill. Something is better than nothing. I completely agree with that. I'm not sure, and maybe I missed it. If I did, I apologize. It doesn't sound like we were really addressing the thorium issue. And if we're not addressing the thorium issue in regards to rare earth,
yeah,
what are we doing?
So, like I said,
because I mean, the Chinese,
it's a halfway, right? Nobody wants a holistic solution because there's somebody somewhere that's isn't going to profit off of it. And so what we're stuck with is this, it's a little better than a half measure, but it relies, it counts on private actors, giving up that infinite greed desire and realizing that there's a mutual dependency in the value chain. And if the individual actors aren't willing to do that, they'll all fail individually, right? So this bill assumes that the actors at each integrated segment of the value chain see the value and acting collectively. And if they don't, it won't work at all. There's nothing you can do. Um, but what do? Congress is not willing to get behind holistic solutions. Congress is so afraid to address issues related to thorium or anything radioactive that, quite frankly, they let, they're putting national security at jeopardy. They're putting our economic security at jeopardy because, the insecurity of, of a populace that can't understand complex issues and facing some retribution at the ballot box. Think about this is what always drives me crazy about politicians. They won't stand up for anything that could cost them, a 1 point move in popularity for their job, but they're willing to declare war and send somebody else's kid off to die, right? Where's the leadership and bravery in politics if you aren't willing to put your seat at risk to do the right thing, but you're sure as hell willing to put somebody else's ass at risk in a foreign war? So for me, that's the way I look at the world, and it you find that very few people are capable of thinking that way. I mean, they're unwilling to take on the responsibilities that they signed on for when they swore an oath to serve as a member of Congress.
Yeah, it doesn't give me much hope, and I don't even. I mean, we can always hope that the next Congress will do something. I don't know.
Well, it's just another really batch of cowards, right? So you sweep out the old cowards, you bring in the new cowards. They're just. It's not a place for. It's become a battlefield, right? It's an ideological battlefield, and you have two political parties at war with each other, and national interest happens to be the theater of war. And national interest gets trampled every day while the Democrats make sure the Republicans don't win and the Republicans make sure the Democrats don't win. And, they're willing to sign on to anything, right? There's no kooky idea that one political party won't accept. So, for example, if you're a Democrat, you're 2 years ago, every textbook printed in America based, your sexual orientation on biology. And in the last 2 years, nobody cares what any textbook says. And if an 8-year-old has a different opinion, he may be sent home. I mean, this is crazy. You go to the Republican side, and over the last 15 years, the number of Republicans who politically state that they no longer believe in evolution went from, some trivial number similar to the Democrats to something like 70%. And if that's really what they think, we're in a lot of trouble. And the only thing worse than that,
I agree.
The only thing worse than that is that they don't believe it, but they're willing to say it. I mean, how much longer before the Republicans are flat earthers, right? That's tomorrow.
I hope it I hope it doesn't get there.
Right, but on the Democratic side, I can't even think of anything loony enough that they haven't already proposed, right?
No, for sure.
Think about this: the Democratic Party went from being the party of civil rights to a political party that says people are defined by the color of their skin.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I don't disagree. Look, I don't disagree with that. I'm just trying to wrap my head about how bad the problem. I mean, look, I've been watching your stuff for years. Okay, I've been watching your stuff for the last 10 years. I'm a big fan of Gordon McDowell and the content that he produces. I've got a lot of my education regarding thorium, regarding molten salt reactors, nuclear technology, and rare earth policy. I've gained that a lot of that, like 90% of it in the last decade. I thought I knew how bad the problem was.
No.
I can honestly say now, after talking to you for just not even for the full session, just for the first 5 minutes, I've kind of lost my for a moment. I just kind of sort of lost my faith in in American politics here. I thought that there were, and look, there's some good people out there. I'm not going to say that they don't exist, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that I'm 34 years old. I don't plan on leaving this country anytime soon. I need to know that there's at least some strategy or some plan to kind of address it. And I thank you, Jim, for what you've done. I'm shocked that I'm talking to the literal amalgamation of Bruce Willis from Armageddon here, coming up with this. Literally that is the first that is the only comparison I can come up with, is you are literally Bruce Willis from Armageddon in terms of solving the rare earth problem. But I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, okay, maybe not this Congress, maybe not the next Congress, but is there a possibility that there might be a path to get, maybe it doesn't have to be in the form of a cooperative, but just some solution to try and address the rare, because at the end of the day, it's thorium. It's the thorium problem. That is the one that is one of the major, that is the one major hiccup that I have read in terms of rare earth policy, because China, our enemy, I have no problem saying that they're an adversary of the West. They don't care. They have no EPA. They have no environmental restrictions. They are literally dumping acid into the ground. They're separating the rare earth materials on site, and they're putting the thorium in canvas bags, letting them bake in the sun. They do not care. They literally don't. I'm not saying we have to do that, but you and John and some other people that I follow, you seem to have come up with a really great solution. I agree with. I think the cooperative solution works. It really drives me nuts that the one thing stopping it is a few corporate interests and a couple of jackasses in the Pentagon here. So I guess my question is, how do we subvert that? I'm trying to get. I want to solve this problem. I want to, because at the recording of this interview, I'm just saying for my audience's benefit, we're literally 3.5 weeks in to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, and everybody's freaking out. There's disagreements as to whether or not the proper steps are being taken to counter it. There's sanctions being imposed on, and I have my own opinion on those. But the main thing that people are talking about is like, well, if Russia can invade Ukraine, what's stopping China from invading Taiwan? Aside from a massive body of water where the water's only calm 3 weeks out of the year. Well, there's us, but. This
goes back to a much deeper problem. So I'm not going to tell you that we're not going to the silver part of the lining on the cloud here. That's not where we're going. Mm-hmm. What's happened in the United States is the misdirection of national economic policy towards private interest, and it is so entrenched and so ubiquitous that people can't even recognize it. And so, for example, you're expressing concern that Russia invaded the Ukraine, right? That's a concern of yours. Well, a concern of mine was that for 3 administrations in a row, U.S. NATO policy was to expand NATO up against Russia's borders, despite the fact that there was an agreement never to do that, and that Russia drew hard lines saying we have national interest and we have to protect ourselves, and so you can't keep doing this, and if you keep doing this, we will be forced to respond. So you're concerned that Russia went into the Ukraine. My concern is that a very small group of people that control almost all U.S. International policy, it's a few thousand people, and the technical term for them is neocon, and you should literally just go to Wikipedia, type in neocon, and see what these people are. But these people affected 3 administrations in a row and drove an insanely aggressive policy of pushing NATO literally right up to the border of Russia with an absolute certainty that Russia would literally be obliged to answer it with some kind of response. So you're concerned that Russia invaded Ukraine. I'm concerned that for 25 years, U.S. policy was literally forcing that to happen. Think about this. Russia, for 25 years, resisted invading the Ukraine or some other country that we were weaponizing on their border. So to me, these are the issues. To me is, everybody is looking at the big screen and I'm looking at the guy behind the curtain, and the guy behind the curtain is controlling U.S. policy, not for good, but for evil. So now they got the response they wanted, and the response they wanted is, ooh, look, Putin bad. Let's build up for another Cold War. Well, this is it. I mean, they're forever war people, right? They couldn't keep scaring us with terrorists anymore. So now they go out and they bring back the boogeyman, the Russian boogeyman, but it's their own creation. They did that to you, right? They did that to you. They lied to you. They misled you. And for 3 administrations in a row, the U.S. pursued a very aggressive policy of violating agreements between the United States and Russia after the Cold War, pushing armed encampments ever closer to their border. So what do you expect them to do? I mean, I'm trying to think of a corollary, and everybody goes, well, if Russia got Mexico into a military alliance right here on the U.S. border, that's what it's like. No, that's not what it's like. That's like Russia already had Mexico in an alliance against us and then brought Canada in. Because we've already done this. We've already converted 12 or 13 former Soviet bloc states into NATO countries against our agreements right up to his border. So you're asking me how do we fix this? Where are the problems? The problems are that the canard of an elected official that we put in office is in charge of nothing. Hate Trump, love Trump, I don't care. Trump said when he was running for election, Iraq is stupid, Afghanistan stupid, Syria stupid, we're getting out. You know what happened? Nothing. The people inside the Pentagon literally lied to the President of the United States about troop withdrawal to keep them in until after the election. It's this forever war stuff. You should do a podcast just on what neocons are. And, I don't care what kind of, Hobbit trilogy you watch with the Lord of the Rings and Sauron or some other evil mastermind. Once you dig in, once you start scratching around and find out what neocons are and their presence in our government and their control over our government, then you're going to realize that we don't have a foreign enemy. We have a domestic enemy. And the domestic enemy operates here in plain sight. And these are the same people that populate the Pentagon. These are the same people that come up with strategies of selling to one unstable regime so that another unstable regime wants these. So this is it. You're saying, Jim, how do we solve the rare earth problem? I'm saying, man, we have a much more serious problem than that.
I don't disagree with you, and the only reason I'm addressing it in the context of this podcast, and look, I hope you understand, totally agree with you 100%. And I'm not a Putin apologist. I don't like him, and what he's doing is horrible right now. But my biggest concern, down the road, regardless of what happens in Ukraine, regardless of what happens in Russia, if we went to war with Russia tomorrow, okay, if NATO got, no, I know you laugh, and I get it, believe me. But look, talking in hypotheticals here. I am more concerned with a war with China than I am with a war with Russia. I know Russia has nukes. People worry about nuclear confrontation and stuff. And look, those are things to be concerned about. But, and I tell people this. I tell my I tell my dad, who used to work in Washington, I tell people that I work with, when you're talking about China, people are talking about the pivot to Asia, back in the Obama years when they're like, oh, China's building up forces, they're building islands in the South China Sea, they're building military bases there. We need to stand up, and it's like, stand up with what? If you engage in any serious conflict with China, which is the sole, as you mentioned, they are the sole provider of rare earth materials on this planet, okay? They have 200,000 PhDs that are dedicated to the science. They have over 20 million people in 2 different cities, which all they do is either directly or indirectly make rare earth materials and support an entire industry behind it. And when you have an entire state-owned initiative that can, subsidize it and pay for all the, the supply chains that don't exist, they can will it into existence. You can't fight a war with China. You just can't.
I agree.
If you go to war with,
I totally agree. This is how bad it is, though. My point is, the comedy show that is America is that when I went to the Pentagon in 2009, I laid out for them a strategy for success. They said, "Oh, have you ever heard of this company called Molycorp?" I said, "Oh yeah, I know all about Molycorp. Here's the geochemistry on their deposit. It's incompatible with national economic and security needs because they can only produce 8 of the rare earths. The business model is a fraud. 89% of their projected income comes from markets that don't exist or technology capabilities they don't have." And I said, so I wouldn't bet on them. They're going to fail. So 5 years later, 6 years later, a tremendous flame out, right? Crash, bankruptcy. And you go, oh, well, I guess they learned, right? No, what are they doing today? Pentagon's piling money into Molycorp 2. It's like a zombie movie, right? Now, Jason's just got a different hockey mask on. They give MP Materials this money, and they pretend it's going to be fixed. And I say to myself, are the people in the Pentagon that stupid? Or are the people in the Pentagon intentionally undermining national security? And there is a limit to stupidity. So that kind of makes you think that maybe it's something else, right? That's an example of how US policy over a 15-year span is incapable of learning, right? The Pentagon is an institution literally incapable of learning because they just bet the entire farm on the same 3-legged horse. And when the whole thing goes bust, again, they're just going to throw up their hands and go, who could have known? Who could have guessed that a mining operation that has no heavy rare earths, no commercially recoverable rare earths, can't solve our national and economic security problems? And with the same bogus business plan. They literally were funded, and all the technology and startup capabilities that got them going came from China. Their only customer is China. Our Pentagon is elected to vote all of its national security money for rare earths to a company that's essentially controlled by China. And so, I agree. We should be worried. And China is different than Russia. At the end of the day, I think Putin and almost all Russians are calculating people. They really are. And so at the end of the day, they're going to be rational, right? Despite all of the bluffing and posturing and everything else, I think Russians with a brutal history of 70 years, I think they're rational, calculating people, and they just do what they have to do. I think the Chinese, it's a very different story. I agree with you that China is playing a very different game. China's game is literally global domination. And like I said before, rare earths is just one of a dozen critical materials that China has an absolute hold over. And so we don't just need to find a strategy to get ourselves out of this rare earth problem. We need a strategy for cobalt. We need a strategy for graphite. We need a strategy for nickel. We need a strategy for lithium.
Sure.
We need a strategy for, manganese. All of these critical materials that are a component, literally a component of the future. China ran out ahead of us 20 years ago and invested heavily and ended up acquiring and controlling the downstream value chain for all of these materials, not just rare earths. So it's not that they've got a shotgun pointed at us, it's that they've got a revolver pointed at us. And it's got a lot more than 6 shots in it. And so what are we doing here to take this on? And I have to say, during the Trump administration, I had some very, very good meetings and relationships with people in the Department of Energy who were alert to this, like you are, like this discussion, like they were like, we need new ideas. Reach into a bag and pull out the craziest idea you've got. We need to. Of course, what happens during the Trump administration? We spend 4 years on a trumped up, Russian scandal, right? And, I mean, Trump himself didn't help very much. I always tell people Donald Trump was a guy standing in a dry field with a box of 250 strike anywhere matches, and he would just walk in circles and flick, matches out, and everybody else would run around putting out fires. So, a lot of it's his own fault. But the truth is, this partisan warfare, the Democrats elected to go to war not with Donald Trump. They went to war with the office of the President of the United States. They went to war with the commander-in-chief, like him or hate him. That's what they did. Okay, that's bad. But you know who else did that? Mitch McConnell. When Mitch McConnell said that immediately after Obama got elected, our job for the next 4 years is to make this guy fail. So it does not help to point out one side of the problem. Unless you're pointing out that both sides are morally corrupt to the core, this game just goes on and on. But I'm doing my best to solve these problems. John and the Thorium Energy Alliance, they're doing their best. There's a lot of people working on it. But in an environment where politics and reality and physics and math and resource availability and supply chain reality very infrequently interface, right? It's just really tough. We have a president of the United States who says that by 2030, he wants half the cars in the US to be electric. And at this exact moment in time, China controls every single significant critical material to make an electric vehicle, somewhere between low end 70%. Well, nickel, I guess, is about 50, but everything else 70 to, in some cases, 100%. So the average, the Rand Corporation admitted this. China controls, on average, for all the critical materials, 80%. So does that mean that Europe and the rest of the world are going to split 20%? No. Nobody's building, a fleet, multiple models of electric vehicles when they can't get guarantees, right? We're all going to be fighting over an insufficient quantity, and China is going to pick and choose the winners of tomorrow. They're going to say, GM, would you like to be the leader in the U.S. for electric vehicles? Well, move some more factories here. Give us some more IP. And quite frankly, that's what's happening, right? Look around. That's how this game's played. China is outmanipulated and outmaneuvered the West, for 20 years. And I don't think the West, I think a lot of it is the lack of respect for them, and there's a cultural racial bias to it. We just believe we're white Anglos or Americans or American capitalists, and that we win automatically. but you don't win automatically.
Mm.
You win by merit, right? We're back to the Democrats, right? Oh, we're going to win because it's our turn or we're not represented. Well, that's not the way the world works. The world works because of merit, and you've earned your place. Kat wants to say hi.
Hey.
So this is the problem. We're living in a world where standard measures of success have been replaced by quotas, and quotas. China basically is. You think they're applying to our quota program? No.
No.
So these are the challenges in front of us, and I think, okay, you're a young guy, you're influencing young people. If you want to fix the supply chain and you want to fix the economy and you want to fix the government, the first thing you need to do is universally reject all political parties. You can't keep pretending that the Republicans are like, your baseball team, whatever they are. They're not your baseball team. They're just a bunch of self-interested, self-aggrandized people that are competing against a bunch of Democrats who are the same. Neither of them are on our side. No one has been doing the business of the American people for 35 years. And until we remove the cancer, the Pentagon gets to keep selecting proven losers as the champion for American rare earths, right? Who criticizes the Pentagon for picking a two-time loser that has a geochemistry that cannot be altered? It's indelible, right? It's forever. And they keep picking the same loser over and over, imagining that one day it'll be a winner. No, I'm the only person that criticizes them, right? Because everybody's afraid to say something because they think those people are all like your nephew who went off to serve in the military. They're nothing like your nephew who went to serve in the military. Anyway, never get me preachy. Ooh, you can get crazy.
Well, I do have to wrap it up here, Jim, but it was good to have you on here. And hey, it's okay to be preachy, Very few people, I could talk to about this. I'd like to have you back on the show again because I feel like this is not something that is going to be resolved, with one episode's worth of content or in one presidential administration. So if you'll have me, I'd like to have you on. And if you're going to be in Albuquerque in October for the I'd like to get a beer with you, sir.
Absolutely. Sounds great. And then
bring your cat too.
Yeah. All right. Listen, thanks so much. I enjoyed speaking with you. And I'm sure you're going to be editing everything I said, but whatever.
No, that's not, we don't do that here. We don't do that here.
All right. I'm not responsible for any viewer loss. But anyway, listen, it was very good. I love that you have a passion and you want to fix things. A lot of young people, I think, are just accepted this, and you and me have to keep fighting, okay?